So years ago, we were on this jungle safari, right? And walking through the jungle, come up to this clearing, and I see this lizard standing up on a rock on his hind leg telling jokes. He was pretty funny. I mean, not as good as... Anyway, I turn to a local tribesman. I'm like, man, this lizard's really funny. The tribesman's like, that's not a lizard. He's a stand-up chameleon. Hey kids, Adam here. Today we're going to do another mixing template video. For those of you who didn't see the first one, there's a link above for the mixing template that I did. Now, that template was pretty much only my folder structure, colors that I use for every instrument, and then the routing that I do to all my different sends. The one big thing I was missing was plugins. I knew it was going to be an issue. I knew a number of you would ask questions about it. Sure enough, you did. Now, the reason I didn't do plugins in there, I kind of explained in the video, they're all third-party plugins, and it doesn't make any sense for me to send you a template that you don't have the plugins for because you'll just get errors opening Reaper. So what I decided to do is I want to do another video with all Reaper stock plugins in a template and make it available for download, similar to how I did that first one. And I kind of have an interesting application for this. Let's head over to Reaper and I'll show you everything that I'm doing and explain what's going on. All right, here we are in Reaper. This is a live practice recording from my band Underground Hive. You can see there's a long recording here. It's a couple hours. It's broken up into songs. Now, what we do at practice, we set up everything to record. Drums, of course, are all mic'd. Those are acoustic drums. Bass goes direct. Guitar, we run a mic cabinet. Keyboards are direct, and then vocals are open microphones. There's a lot of crossover, a lot of bleed through, and the guitarist has been kind of struggling getting these things mixed to sound decent with it, with just a default template that works. So I decided to just use all Reaper stock plugins. That way we can transfer between computers in case somebody wants to work on a project like me here. If I don't have the same plugins that he has at his place, or he doesn't have the same plugins on one computer that he has at practice, things like that. So that's why I decided to do this video, because I wanted to make this template and see if we can transfer this from practice to practice. Let me play you a sample now. This is just everything raw, no effects or anything like that. You'll notice, first of all, the volumes are way out of whack. So as I'm doing this mix, there were a couple of instruments, specifically keyboards, that I have problems with. I'll get into that in a little bit. But I had to adjust the volume after the fact, after I got the plugins on. But that's what I had to start with. The drums are way in the background. Bass, of course, sounds great because it's bass, it's direct, there's no bleed through, it's just a direct signal. Keyboard volume is way out of whack, and you'll notice there's no vocals. Get to that later. That's going to be another beast we'll tackle. Let me throw on all of the plugins, including what I have on the master fader, along with some reverb, and this is the after everything's done, still without vocals. You'll first notice there's thump in the kick, there's crack in the snare, the bass blends well with the kit, the guitars sound much better, kind of more focused in, and the keyboard volume is way under control. I didn't do a lot with this mix, and you'll see in a second. Let's start with what I'm doing on the master fader. It's pretty simple. In fact, everything in mixing is really going to be EQ, compression, saturation, and then effects. My master fader, I do similar to what I do in my regular mixes. In fact, there's a card that I will put up for a link to my master fader and what I do for my mix bus processing. Simple EQ, I'm doing a high pass. I'm doing a bump in the bass, between the bass and the kick range. I'm doing a cut at 300 hertz. Exactly, to get rid of some of that boxiness. And then the other thing I'm doing is just a high shelf somewhere around 8K. Then I put recomp on there. I'm aiming for 1 to 2 dB of gain reduction. It's a 2-to-1 ratio. It's really low, and that's really the only setting that I have. 30 millisecond attack, 100 millisecond release. It's kind of a standard for mix bus. JS saturation, I put a really pretty low setting. I waited until afterwards, and I kind of dialed it in, and then I put a limiter on. You'll notice I haven't changed the threshold at all. I just put a brick wall ceiling at negative 3 dB. I don't want anything to go over that. So that's everything, just the mix bus. In fact, let me take out all the effects here and play it with just the mix bus processing, and I'll do on and off so you can hear before and after. Pretty good change already, just with a little bit of EQ, a little bit of compression, some saturation, and that kind of helps glue things together, and then a limiter to tame any peaks. Let's go instrument by instrument. On the drum bus itself, again, EQ, compression, saturation. I do a couple different bumps in the one for kind of the kick, one for kind of the snare, one to take out a little bit at that 300 hertz, and then one high shelf to kind of bring out some of the cymbals and overheads. Recomp at a pretty standard setting, attack 10 milliseconds, release 100 milliseconds, 4:1 ratio. And I think I just took the default and bumped the attack up a little bit. And again, I'm looking for 2 to 3 or so dB gain reduction. And then I threw JS saturation on there. Kick, I'm doing a bump where the base of the kick is, which is like 60 hertz-ish. I'm doing a cut around 300. I take a lot out of 300, almost every instrument in every situation here. And then I'm doing some bumps. I'm kind of simulating what I would do on a SSL channel. I do a bump at about 1K. I do another bump at, I do a high shelf at 8K, and I bump it all the way up to all 12 dB. And I do another kick, bump at like 3.5 for kind of that snap in the kick. And then for compression, I'm doing a lot more. I'm looking for like 6 dB gain reduction here. In fact, if I solo out the kick here, and before, there's just much more thumb. I'm adding a lot of volume, I admit that, but there's a lot more thumb and a lot more definition there. Snare, very similar. The only difference is instead of using the regular recomp, I'm using the 1175 compressor. 4:1 ratio, kind of attack all the way to the left, which is the fastest. Release a little bit off center, then dial in threshold and makeup gain to match. And again, JS saturation on snare, I find at 100% sounds really good. Real quick before and after. Toms, there's really nothing going on here other than I'm not doing individual toms. I'm doing just a general re-EQ on the tom bus and another recomp. In fact, this is just the default recomp settings, and I dial in the threshold to bring in some. Let's see if we can find a tom fill here. Overheads, I did find here that my overheads and my snare are out of phase. That's one thing you want to do. In fact, I should do a video on phase. Although there are a lot of videos out there that are probably better suited for that. Check out Recording Revolution for some of the things he does. He has videos that he'll title something like "Make Your Drums Sound Huge" with one simple move, and that's always dealing with phase. So for those, I flip the phase on both the overheads. I'm doing just some simple EQ. For overheads, I find you can get rid of a lot of the phase issues between the overheads themselves with a high-pass filter at, like here it happens to be 420.2. Anywhere from 300 to 500 hertz. It gets rid of all the low-mid buildup. And then I do a couple cuts here and there for when things are sticking out. And then I do a high shelf to kind of bump things up. I'm using recomp, but with 4:1 ratio, I'm getting like 2 to 3 dB of gain reduction. We'll do it before and after here. I'm really just getting a little bit of like the snap in the snare, and then the cymbals. The overheads are taking care of all the cymbals. From there, we move on to the bass. I'll put my card up for how I mix my bass. I'm using a different bass in this video. In fact, using it's back here, the precision bass that I featured in a number of videos recently. Take a look for those. I won't put cards up for those because there are a number of them. Let's just do it before and after, and then I'll show you what I'm doing. So my EQ is fairly similar for all my basses. I didn't really dial it in. In fact, I originally did this video for the purple bass that's over my shoulder here, and I found the sounds were pretty similar. I do a high pass. I do a cut where the kick is, which is about 60 hertz. I do a boost where the actual bass of the bass is, around 120 hertz. I do a bump somewhere around 1 to 1.5K, another one at about 3K for the attack. And then I just kind of shelf things off with a low pass there. I'm using double stacked 1175 compressors, which is Reaper's 1176. I get about 3 to 5 dB of gain reduction on each. And then I put JS saturation somewhere from 60 to 85 is the number that tends to work well for bass. That's real simple. Guitar may actually be simpler. In fact, we'll do a before and after. This is not a fully distorted, but it's not a fully clean. It's like a crunchy, distorted type sound. Before all the effects and then after. So here I didn't want to do a whole lot. When I would mix, I would do a number of things. The first thing I would do when we mix a real recording is double track the guitars, so I have one pan left and right. For here, all I did was a high pass filter at 100 just to get out some low rumbly stuff, and the guitar kind of works well on its own. There's a number, and we'll get into some sound samples later on. There's a number of different guitar sounds he's using, and they're all coming through the same track. So I don't want to split these up based on sound like I would in a regular recording. Recomp, very, very light here, 2-to-1 ratio, and I'm getting 1 to 2 dB of gain reduction just to kind of tame off some of the louder stuff. You really don't want to compress distorted guitar, but there is some clean here that kind of needs taming. And then I put JS saturation somewhere in the 50s. Nothing major there. For keyboards, he's using 2 different keyboards. We labeled them here. One's a Yamaha something or another. One's a Yamaha. They're both Yamahas. One's a Motif. One's a something or another. I'm a bass guy. I can barely figure out what basses I have. But he has part of the problem that we have in our practice and our live shows is that his volumes are all over the place. You can see by these waveforms here. Let me expand this one. It's like for the second keyword, it's really quiet here. And then it's really loud here. And then it's really loud here. I needed to do something without like volume automation. In a regular mix, I would volume automate this, or actually I would fix it on the way in. In fact, I'm going to show this to him, and we're going to fix a lot of things in his keyboards over the next few weeks at practice. For this template, I have to be able to deal with any sound that comes through. I don't want to have it blasting, and I don't want to have it be too quiet. So I did some things here with compression and limiting that I normally wouldn't do this drastically. So EQ, doing kind of that telephone-ish EQ, high pass, low pass, a bump in the mids, just kind of bring out those natural keyboard sounds. Recomp, I have dialed way in. So if I go back to this first example, I'm pulling a lot down. And then when we get to the part that's louder, it's really compressing it. And then I have a limiter on here that I have the threshold and ceiling at the same level. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to take these volumes and make them like this and make them closer together. So with the, if you watch the limiter play here, you'll see that everything's kind of in that same area. So what we've gone from something like this, which is probably just going to kill your ears. In fact, I'll turn that down in post a little bit so it doesn't kill you, to something like this. And it should bring up some of the low volume and bring down a lot of the highs so that everything is more of an even, volume level. Now let's get to the vocals. This is where things are going to get rough. Let me play you just the vocals without any effects on at all, and you'll hear what we're dealing with.
Again, laughing at the duty, there I go again, crying in the dark.
So you'll notice there's a lot of drums coming through. And you'll also notice the Adam Vox channel is brought down. I really only sing in one song. No need to leave mine on for all those. But if we play in an instrumental part, like the first part we had, if I play just the instruments and then I unmute the vocals, listen what happens. The vocal mics are pretty much spread around the room. So we have the drums in corner. It's just typical square room. Drums are in a corner, and we have drums have a mic, keyboards have a mic, I have a mic, guitar has a mic, and they're picking up drums from every area. There's no way to gate that out. The vocals sometimes aren't louder than the drums coming through, especially with crashing things. And I messed around with gates. I just couldn't get anything working. I've done a lot of EQ here to try to tame some of those things and to try to make it so that they're not really bringing in more drums. The first thing that I did is on the main vocal channel, and I'll put a link here to my how I process vocals video. I just put a high pass filter at 100, and then I put a low pass upward in like the 12K range to try to tame some of those cymbals. That helps a little bit. That helps some of that bassy, effecty stuff. And then I did EQ and compression on every vocal. I'll just look at Dylan's here quick. I just did a high pass and a low pass and took out some at like 300 of that in that kind of chest wolfy, boxy area. And then I actually did even though I'm doing a low pass at 8400, I'm doing a high shelf at 8600. It just kind of brings in a little bit of those highs in the vocals and trying to cut them out of the trying to cut the drums out of them. So let's do a before and after vocal section, and I'll turn the effects on and off as we go, and start with all of them off.
Again, laughing at the dude, there I go again, crying in the dark, shut your eyes again, surrender to the beauty, hit your doors to be free, free, free.
I had to turn down a lot of the volume level of vocals, so we're not going to get a vocal over the top like you would in a normal recording. This is kind of the best that I can do here. What it did open up is that we have to work on mic placement. Although in the room that we're in, it's probably not much bigger than my room that I'm in here. You can't see the whole thing. I don't know why I'm turning my chair because the camera doesn't move, but there's really not a lot of space. Now, we are going to do some live recording in the future. What we will do is we will not record vocals during the normal takes. We're going to do some, I don't know, either plexiglass or some foam surrounding the guitar mic. And that way the drums won't bleed into the guitar and the guitar won't bleed into the drums. And that way we can get a kind of a live sounding recording. In fact, I'll put a link to a video here called Kevin's Space Adventures, where that was a live band practice recording with the same gear and the same setup that we're using in this video. That's an instrumental song that I put together a couple of years ago. And then finally, after getting all this set up, I want to add some verb to it, make it lively. Now, normally, like when I was showing you my how to process vocals video, I'm using delays and I'm using different things, but this is really this is what would be more representative of like a live show, where everything's bleeding and everything. There's faders, and the sound guy isn't doing a whole lot. He may have some default reverb on the vocals. You get kind of a room reverb sound just because you're in a live hall. But for this, I wanted to put some reverb on. So I'm using Reverb 8 on a send channel. I messed with the dampening and the room size to get it to sound kind of how I wanted. I should have just shot a vocal. What I usually do is I'll shoot a vocal through and get the settings set up and then kind of moving on to the other instruments. I did put a high pass filter a little over 400 hertz, a low pass at about 11K just to knock off the low rumbly stuff and the boxy mids, and then like the highs. We definitely don't need any more highs in this with all the cymbals and drum bleed coming through. And then I send each of my groups to that reverb. So I do my drum bus, I do my bass channel, there's only one bass track. Guitars, there's only one guitar, both the keyboards via the folder and then the vocals via the folder. I also added to the overhead specifically and the tom specifically, just got a little bit more out of both of those. Those are harder instruments to kind of bring out. And just the reverb alone sounds like this. So, I mean, the bass is coming through, but it's really not. It's negative 18 dB, so it's really, really low in the mix. In fact, if I have any cards left, I'll put a link up to how I use reverbs and delays, and that goes in a little bit more of how I use them and how I send the instruments to them. But the trick is, if you use a room reverb and you send all of your instruments to it, despite any other effects that you're using, reverb or delays or whatever, it can kind of make the performance sound like it happened in the same room, even if you're recording separately. We're in a pretty dead room. We have like office wall divider, cubicle dividers around the entire room. So there's not a lot of reflections. There is on the ceilings, and we can't really treat those in our practice place, but it is kind of a dead room. So I wanted to add a little bit of reverb and a little bit of life. So let me play this with the reverb off and then with the reverb on.
Again, laughing at the dude, there I go again, crying in the dark, shut your eyes again, surrender to the dude.
So it actually adds a lot. It opens things up. It makes things a little bit brighter because of the fact that all the cymbals are coming in and the overheads, and of course, by virtue of the vocal tracks coming in with all the extra drums that come through there. But it really brings it alive and it kind of opens it up a little bit. It doesn't sound like a mixed recording, but it's certainly going to be easier for us to listen to practices, because that's the reason we record practices. We listen to the mistakes we made, listen to things, how we make them better. When we're writing songs, it's really useful because we can listen to what we recorded. If we have 2 or 3 different takes of something, someone will say on one of their microphones, this is take 3 with the blue blah, 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 blah on the chorus or the different thing or whatever. And it really helps us in between practices to figure out where things are going and where our sounds are and things like that. So that said, that is the mixing template. I will put a link in the description to the zip file of this template. If you have Reaper, you have all these plugins. I'm not using any repack or any third-party plugins or anything. You should be able to open this up and it should come up just fine with all these things. Basically, what you want to do is you want to delete out the waves. Actually, I won't even include the waves. I'll just have them, the tracks. You just want to insert your waves from your practice into this, and then you want to tweak. You definitely can't go and just plug your stuff in because there's certain things that are going to be different volumes, different tones, different everything. But this should give you a pretty good start. So that's it. What did you think? Is this something that you'd be interested in using? Do you have any questions on any of the plugins? Leave it in the comments below. Till next time, while we're enjoying the sounds of Dylan Fuller on guitar in the solo section of the song, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, leave me a thumbs up and all the other stuff, and share it to all your friends and make me famous. I don't really want to be famous, but until next time, have yourselves an amazing week. I turned this local tribesman and said, hey, that lizard's really funny. Tribesman's like, try it.